ለመማር ወደ ትምህርት ተቋም መሄድ ግድ አይደለም።
ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
ራሳችሁን ከኮሮና ቫይረስ ወረርሽኝ እየጠበቃችሁ በቤታችሁ ወይም በተመቻችሁ ቦታ
በኢንተርኔት አማካኝነት በኦንላይን ትምህርታችሁን መከታተል ይቻላል።
ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና
ከእንግሊዙ ኢንስቲትዩት ኦፍ ኮመርሻል ማኔጅመንት ICM ጋር በመተባበር የሚሰጡ ትምህርቶችን ተከታትላችሁ በ6 ወር ጊዜ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ ተቀባይነት ያለውን የስልጠና ማስረጃ ባለቤት መሆን ይቻላል።
ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና ባገኘንባቸው የፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን እና የሆስተስ ስልጠናም በምዝገባ ላይ ነን።
ጥያቄና መልስ፣ የክፍል ስራዎች ብሎም ፈተና መፈተን ክፍል ውስጥ እንዳላችሁ አይነት
ልምድ ባላቸው መምህራን እየተማራችሁ
በኦንላይን ባላችሁበት ቦታ
አድራሻ ከ22 ማዞሪያ ወደ ሾላ ገበያ በሚወስደው መንገድ 150 ሜትር ገባ ብሎ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ
ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
So today we will start a discussion on chapter 1, which is introduction to fundamental concept of risk. And actually this section is more of introduction about some concept of risk. And as we have been discussed, based on your suggestion, I try to modify the content of chapter 1 and the rest of the courses. So I'll try to make more, I try to give the course or try to convert the course into finance and project management concepts. So the entire of our discussion concerning this chapter will be more related with finance, insurance, and project management terminologies. So as usual, we try to, we will start our discussion by defining risk. I think everybody is familiarized with the term risk because as a person, we are exposed to some of the risks in every day, in every moment of our life. So most of you know, almost all of you know, you are familiar with the term risk because our life is strictly aligned with some risks while we were working our work, while we drive, while we walk around the street, and when we invest and when we participate in some investment issues, we know and we are very familiar with the term risk. The problem with defining risk is the term risk has no universal agreement, especially when you define risk. There is no some universal agreements because some disciplines or every disciplines try to give meaning for the term risk according to the nature of the field of the disciplines. As a result, the term risk has many terminologies and conceptual connotations. So, however, there are some important terminologies often used in defining risk, right? In defining risk. For instance, almost all the definition of risk use the term uncertainty, which deals about the future. And the future, as you know, is not simply a repetition of the past. And the future, the present is not a reality, or is not only the only realities. So there is a difference between what is, what should be, and what would be in the future. So scholars use the term uncertainty to define risk. The other most important terminology used to define risk is probability, which is the most important concept when you define uncertainties. And probability probabilities is a typical issue in risk analysis and risk management. So The most common definition identify risk as a product of damage of potential or the probability that a certain future event will occur. So generally, we can say that in defining risk, you should underline the two most important words, uncertainty and probability. But here are not the only words we use to define risk. Next is the next is about so as I said before, as human, we are experiencing at any given point in time is only one of many possible futures people may have imagined in the past. And it is impossible to state with certainty that the world would look like tomorrow. Therefore, we can say we can give a meaning for the concept of risks from the social point of view as a future-oriented or actively wanted to break away of the past. There are a lot of noises. Can you please mute ታደርጋላችሁ? አንዳንዶቻችሁ እንትን ይሰማኛል፣ የመረበሽ ነገር አለው። ምናዬ ይሰማችኋል? ምናዬ ሰብለውኝ ፕሊዝ ሚዩት።
እኔ አሁን ነው ያበራሁት። እኔ ሚዩት ነኝ። ምናዬ ግን ከኮሌጁ ስለሆነ ምናልባት ከዛ ከጀርባ ከመጣ ነው እንጂ እኔ አሁን ስትጠይቅ ነው ያበራሁት።
ኦኬ ኦኬ። አንዳንዴ ድምፅ ስለሚገባ ነው። The next one is we have to give conceptual meaning for the term risk. As I said before, various disciplines have their own definition for the term risk. However, we have to be selective, and I prefer to provide meaning for risk from the perspective of finance and project management. So, from the viewpoint of finance or financiers, risk is defined as the chance that an outcome or investment actual gain will differ from the expected outcome or return. And actually, this is the meaning of risk from the perspectives of, or from financial perspective. In short, risk is defined as a deviation between our expectation and the outcome, the actual outcome. And it includes the possibility of losing some or all of the original investment or the initial investments. So we can give a meaning for from the viewpoint of financiers. We can define investment risk, or investment risk happen when investors expect higher return to compensate for their takes to compensate. Or we can say that if an investor expects more return and the actual is less than from the expected, we can say investment risk, which is related with some of the finance terms. The other definition is from project management view, which is related with some management concerns. So usually project managers define project risk because we have to give the meaning project risk, right? Project risk as an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative impact on at least one project objectives. So it has some relationship with the definition of risk from financial perspectives. So we can say that the possibility of positive or negative impact on at least one objective of the project, because a given project may have various objectives, right? Such as time, cost, or cost of the qualities. I mean, its positive or negative effect may be on time, the cost of the project, the scope of the project, or the quality of the implementation of the project. So when we define project risk, we have to ask some what if questions. For example, what can go wrong with the project? What is the likelihood of the occurrence of the event, the occurrence of the risk, or the occurrence of the hazard? Or what will be the damage be? I mean, which part of the project will be damaged, or which objectives will be seriously affected? What can we do about it? That means how to resolve a project risk. So generally, from different dimensions, we can conclude that risk may have one or more causes. And in fact, it may have one or more impacts, right? And one important thing you have to remember is not all risks are bad. There are some risks which create opportunities, right? So there is a traditional alignment. Most of the people consider risk something negative or something a threat. However, from the actual or from the theoretical point of view, risk may have also opportunities. So we shouldn't disregard risks. Some risks may have their own advantage. And we have to underline a risk is not always a bad consequence, or it's not always a negative consequence. Even though it's negative, it will have some positive opportunities, right? So the important thing is how we can deal with a given risk, right? How we can deal with a given risk. So here is the reason why you learn risk management and risk analysis. In order to resolve or revolve or to manage risk, a person should have basic understanding on how basic risk and how it's measured. So learning risk or learning this subject will help you to apply different risk analysis tools, different managements, and different strategies to cope up with a given risk. So the next issue is, once we define risk, what's left is what is risk analysis? What does mean risk analysis? We have a given hint, or we have a hint about the definition of risk from dimensional finances and from project management perspective, and from general literature perspectives. So this is our time to discuss what does mean risk analysis is. So risk analysis is a kind of approach, or it is a kind of methodology that used to evaluate and drive the probability of an adverse effect of a given agent or industrial process or new or existing technologies or a natural process, right? Natural process. Therefore, a risk analysis means it is a tool or it is a methodology that we can evaluate the effects of risk. In fact, most of the effect of risk is adverse. So we have to measure the adverse effect of a given risk. And the methodology or the tool we used, call them risk analysis, right? Risk analysis. In defining risk analysis, there is a most important word, which is adverse effects, right? Adverse effect, which means negative effect. In usual term, adverse effect of risk might be, or it could be, death or disease, or it may be a failure of a given project, or being unsuccessful to achieve a certain planned action, right? Planned actions. So adverse effects may be explained in terms of death, or disease, or injury, or a failure of some projects, right? A failure of some projects. Or we can say loss of investment opportunities, or deviation from expected outcomes or expected return. We call it adverse effect. And in recent words or recent cases, when we say adverse effect of risk, it includes quality of life and sense of community, right? Sense of community, which has to be evaluated using risk analysis tools, right? Risk analysis. In fact, traditionally, the adverse effect of risk, we aligned it with health issues, ecological issues, or economic well-being, right? Economic well-being. Anyways, when you say the adverse effect, it will represent death or disease, failure of a given project, or loss of investment, or in general, we can say quality of life or sense of community, right? Community. The other thing is, the other issue with regard to risk analysis is what are the elements of risk analysis, right? What are the elements of risk analysis? Actually, elements of risk analysis in the literature is mostly or most frequently aligned with potential health effect of potential health effects, right? Health effects. But according to this National Association of Science, there are at least 4 elements of risk analysis. At least 4 elements of risk analysis. The first one is we have to identify the hazard or the agent, right? The hazard or the agent. That means signals. It might be chemical or it might be physical or other issues, right? So we have to identify agents or the sign of the effect, right? The other one is related with quantity. In scientific term, we call it dose response or relationship, which is often related with quality, intensity, or concentration of the hazard or the adverse effect of the hazard, which means we need to measure the quantity of the adverse effect of a given risk, right? The third element of risk analysis is exposure analysis. Who is exposed for risk? To what extent and how much the effect? How long the effect will stay? And other related issues. And in fact, the third element of risk analysis is all about the identification who will be affected, the extent of the effect, and what and how much the effect and how long it takes the effect. This is the third element of risk analysis. The fourth and the most important element of risk analysis is risk characterization, right? It is all about calculation of the first 3 elements of risk analysis. Calculation based on some historical data. Calculation of the effect based on some assumptions. Assumptions, actually, when we compute the risk, we have to have some underlying assumptions we will discuss in next period. And characterization means based on the computation of the data and based on the evaluation of the assumptions, we have to arrive on conclusions, right? On conclusions. Or we can say we have to derive or expressed in a meaningful term, in a meaningful values or magnitudes of the effect. We call them risk characterizations. In general, from science perspective, especially with regard to potential health risk, there are 4 elements of the risk analysis. Identification of the hazard or the agent, or determination of the quantity, the intensity and concentration, and measuring the exposure or identifying the exposure, and finally, evaluating or calculations the risk characterizations, right? Risk characterizations. ጥያቄዎች ካላችሁ መሀል ላይ ታስቆሙኛላችሁ። ይሰማል አይደል?
ይሰማል።
ኦኬ፣ ጥያቄዎች ካለ መሀል ላይ በድምጽ ማሰማት ትችላላችሁ። ጀነራሊ
እዚህ ላይ ጥያቄ አለኝ።
እሺ፣ የት ጋር ነው?
አሁን ፎር ኤሌመንት ኦፍ ሪስክ አናላይሲስ የተባለ
this one, all right.
እነዚህ what the difference between this four element of risk analysis and the step of risk management process?
All right.
Is there any difference between them?
That's a good question. Actually, we will discuss maybe the next slide is about risk management process and risk analysis. Here is about element of risk analysis, which means when we analyze the risk, the item we have to consider, right? It is not about the process. Here is about elements or items we have to consider when we analyze, when we make risk analysis. With regard to the step of risk analysis, that's a different concept. We will learn today, right? We will learn today. So, and actually, here are not the only elements. Here are the elements from the perspective of risk. Elements are according to National Association of Science, the science perspective. Because as I told you before, there is no a certain rules. There is no a universally accepted issues related with risk definition and risk analysis, because the term by itself is very subjective, right? Very subjective. I just took these elements which are very common in the literature, right? Very common in the literatures. So what you have to remember here is, here are the elements that we have to consider when we conduct risk analysis. Basic elements, not all elements, right? Not all elements. And with regard to the process and the steps, in fact, we will learn it, right? We'll learn it. All right.
Okay.
All right. So, when we discuss about risk analysis, you should not forget risk analysis is a very complex process, because there are unlimited or type of risks associated with a given project or a given task. So what we have to remember is we have to take extensive training, right? Extensive training. If you see this one, no one wants to have a surgery performed by untrained layman. The same works to risk analysis. ታመን ወደ ሆስፒታል ብንሄድ ትሬንድ ያልሆነ ሰርጀሪስት እንዲያደርገን አንፈልግም። ስለዚህ ሪስክ አናሊሲስ ሲሰራ it needs extensive training. A group of people comes from different disciplines, right? So we can say that a risk analysis may be a very risky business. In fact, risk analysis is a business, right? A very risky business if it is performed by untrained people. So what is the remedy, or what is the best option to have or to make adequate risk analysis is we have to incorporate peoples from various disciplines, interdisciplinary lectures, and should be right. The third point in this chapter is about historical overview of risk analysis. Before we go to the actual risk analysis, let's see the history, the trend over a period. So I'm not good in history, but from the literatures indicate that risk analysis starts before 3200 BC year, and in the area, what you call it, Tigris and Euphrates, and actually this is a common name or a known name in Bible. And a group of people called Askew served as the risk analysis consultant for the people making risk, uncertainty, or difficult decisions. So we can say that risk analysis is a very old trend, right? A very old trend. Later, the Greeks and the Romanian tried to investigate some cause and effect relationship between exposure and disease. And so you have to remember here, historically, risk analysis is related with medical issues, exposure to a given activity and disease or injury, right? For instance, Hippocrates in the 4th century, he relate or he investigate the correlation or the occurrence of disease with environmental exposure. That means if someone is exposed for a given environment, we don't know the given environment, what's the given environment here, but it's supposed to have related with some disease or not. And Vitrus in the 1st century, he indicate the problem of or lead is a toxic item. You know, lead is toxicity. And later, Angola in the 16th century, it is the most recent. Agricola in the 6th centuries, he underlined the correlation between occupational exposure to mining and health. It became very specific. If you see Hippocrates is related with environment and some disease. And here in Agricola in the 16th centuries, he tried to make very specific occupational exposure to mining with health. Later, in modern risk analysis, actually the base for modern risk analysis is the foundation of probability theory by Pascal. Since the probability theory developed in 17th centuries, modern risk analysis has begun, right? Has begun. And in fact, probability theory easy some complex issues, complex computational issues related with analysis. So here are the 3 modern historical phenomena related with risk analysis. In 1657, Pascal introduced probability theory. Later, Edmund Halley proposed life expectancy table. I think everybody knows this table, life expectancy tables. And recently, in 1792, Simon de Lapin developed a true prototype of modern quantitative risk analysis. We often consider that as a modern way of analyzing risk. And the analysis is more of quantitative, right? More of quantitative. So he calculates the probability of death with and without a smallpox and vaccination, right? Vaccinations. So you can see the flow from earlier period to modern risk analysis. When you come to contemporary history of risk analysis, it's related with the period of capitalism, where money is spent in terms of interest, and scholars, they start using mathematical models which align with probability theories in order to evaluate risk for a given action, right? A given action. For example, during the capitalism period or after 18th centuries, the risk of dying was calculated for insurance purpose. You know this one because your major is more of related with insurance. Your major is insurance. So using some mathematical models and with probability theories, they start to calculate life expectancy table. And physicians in the Middle Age also observe a correlation between exposure to chemical or agent, and health. Some exposure with chemical and health. In fact, this is related with the investigation of disease like that of cancer, right? Cancer. And later and most recently, Evelyn noticed that smoke in London caused respiratory problem. And here is to indicate the historical development of risk analysis, right? Risk analysis. Now we have to go to risk management, right? It is risk management, a broader concept which incorporates risk analysis, right? Risk analysis. So before we start a discussion on risk management, you have to remind that risk management includes risk analysis, right? It includes risk analysis. So to define what risk management is, it is a systematic approach, or it is a scientific approach used to reduce the harm due to risk, or it is the way we manage. Reduce. The most important word in risk is reduce. We have to remember reduce because there are a lot of risks that cannot completely avoided, right? Avoided. That is why we say management is more related with reduction of the effect of a given risk, right? A given risk. So risk management in general is an approach, right? Is an approach to reduce the adverse effect of risk, or from project management perspective, making a project less vulnerable to challenge or failure, right? From project management concept. For instance, cost or schedule overruns, scope decrease, quality of reductions. Here are some risks related with for a project, right? And it is results product more robust. I mean, to make the products more robust, right? More robust. And historically, risk management is related with insurance, the concept of insurance, where it evolved before 3,100 years in Mesopotamia. You know the history of insurance, right? So insurance is often considered as the oldest strategy for dealing with risk and risk management, right? The oldest strategy. So the concept of insurance is one part or element of risk management, right? One element or part of elements. And most risk management tools has been established or created after the concept of insurance came to the world. That's why we say the establishment of insurance are the best strategy to do with risk and risk management. In contemporary society means present society, insurance has to develop to deal with a wide variety of phenomena, ranging from health insurance to mortgage insurance, right? Mortgage insurance. So from risk management concept, we have to take an important basic word from insurance, that is actuaries, those who calculate insurance premium, right? Insurance premiums. So at the beginning, actuaries are always considered as the best risk assessors, because failure to compute premium is failure to it leads to loss, right? It leads to loss, at least at an insurance level, right? Insurance level. Now let's see the strategies of risk management, right? Or the way or the strategies or methods of risk management. Generally, broadly speaking, there are two risk management strategies. The one, we call it reactive, and the other one is proactive. Reactive means it is just a reaction once the risk happen or the risk occur, right? The risk occur. For instance, from project management perspective, project team may react to the risk when they occur, right? When they occur. And it is all about mitigation of risk, mitigating the risk. Or it is a kind of fighting how to reduce the effect of risk. Or sometimes we call it is a means to fix on failure. Or it is a means to, it is a way to tackle our failures using available resources, right? And most importantly, we call it is an approach to manage crisis, right? To manage crisis. So generally, active risk management means it is all about dealing of risk or mitigation of risk once it occurs. Or we call it is a management of crisis once it happens, right? Once it happens. Proactive risk management is related with formal risk analysis. Formal risk analysis, often a risk analysis should have to be made before the risk happens, right? Here, risk analysis should be undertaken before the risk happens. Therefore, there is a formal means of analyzing the risk, right? It is all about correcting the root cause of risk. There are causes, known, unknown causes, right? Cause of risks. For example, the use of total quality management concept in management and statistical quantity analysis and other issues, right? And other issues. So the main difference between the two strategies is the one we manage before it happens or before the risk occurs, that is proactive, and reactive is when the risk happens, we try to reduce its effect, right? Reduce its effect. Now let's discuss element of risk management, right? Element of risk management. As you can see, risk management can broadly classified into risk analysis and risk control, right? Risk control. So today we will focus on what risk analysis means. And risk analysis has three major steps. One is identification, the second one is assessment, and the last one is mitigation. So today we will discuss a risk analysis process, right? Risk analysis process. Right? The process, right? Risk analysis process. Now, before we start our discussion on the process, let us see what is the actual view regard to risk analysis, right? Risk analysis. Generally speaking, there are two contradicting views about risk analysis, or related with the question whether risk can be actually be managed or cannot be. There are two dominant views related with whether risk can be managed or cannot be. The first group of people, they say risk are external variables affecting an institution without any possibility of influencing their probability of occurrence or reducing their damage potential. Or in short, this view says risk is external and we cannot compute its probability of occurrence and we cannot manage its damage. It's effect, one view. It's more pessimistic, right? The second view is they say risk can be absolutely controlled by scientific means or rational action, right? They argue that a risk is something that absolutely controlled using some scientific or rational action. So which is true? Which view is favorable for you? In fact, both views are not correct. A risk is not something that we cannot predict, that we cannot avoid, that we cannot mitigate. And at the same time, there are risks that cannot be avoided even if we use complex methods, scientific approach, right? Scientific approach, right? They are wrong because, sorry? ድምፅ ይሰማኛል። ጥያቄ አለ? All right. Therefore, they are wrong because they deviate against the characteristics of risk. There are at least fundamental characteristics of risks. For instance, uncertain, and it is something that will happen to the future. And risk is also affected by some human behavior and some human decisions taken by humans, right? Some humans. Therefore, even though we say the two views are not correct or against from some standards, there is an issue we have to remind. That is, risk can never be predicted with absolute uncertainty, whether or how they will arise and evolve over the time, right? So risk never been predicted with absolute certainty, which is against to the second view, right? Second view. Therefore, there must be something pragmatic approach that must lie between the two views, right? Between the two views. That is, we call it a risk analysis process, right? Risk analysis process, right? Risk analysis process. So, as we see here, there are three processes in risk analysis: risk identification, assessment, and mitigation. Now, let us see risk identification process. How we can identify risk, which is the first step in risk analysis, right? The first step in risk analysis. Risk identification is all about determining what risk may have an impact on maybe a project, maybe an investment alternatives or something, right? So this is all about what risk may have an impact on a given thing, right? So risk identification is an iterative or incremental process that continuously add new risk. See, it is a continental process. If we investigate some risk now, we have to go to identify another risk, right? Which means identify a new risk, delete non-risk items, and refine existing risk profile, right? Refine existing risk profile to our project, right? To our project. So, if we are successful in identifying our risk, for sure, we will be effective in mitigating risk, which means the last step in risk identification process, right? Risk identification process. However, in order to identify risk, there must be a good ground, a good landscape, which contains holistic features, right? Holistic features related with the project or the risk we are going to analyze. So an important thing or an important issue we have to remember in identifying risk is the early we identify the risk, the more successful to mitigate the risk, right? Or to prevent the risk. Or early identification of risk will help decision makers to prevent risk from developing into issues that are likely to threaten the stated goals, interests, or values. So try to identify risk at early stage of your work, at early stage of okay, so Longi.
My question is it possible to identify all risks?
No, that's a good question. So actually, no. If we can identify all risks, we could have a solution to all of them, right? Identify. Almost undefined type. Defined የማናደርገው risk አለ. In human life, in business, in other issues, right? ሁሉንም risk identify ማድረግ አይቻልም. ነገር ግን ምንድነው? We can go rigorously. At least major የሆኑ ሪስኮችን ሰርቫይቫልን ሂውማን ሰርቫይቫልን ወይም ደግሞ አቺቭመንት ኦፍ ሰርቴን ጎልስ ያንን adversely affect የሚያደርጉ አይተሞችን we can go as far as possible, but in practice it is very difficult to identify all risk, right?
Okay,
it's difficult to identify all risk. So early identification of risk will provide for risk analysis sufficient time to take appropriate measures. Who take measures? Managers, right? To tackle the risk before it become acute, right? Before it become acute. So those who conduct early assessment of risk, they will have surprise effect. In fact, surprise effect means just it is in terms of achieving goal, right? In terms of achieving goal. So the other thing is related with warning signals in identifying risk, right? Warning signals, or in strategic management concept, we call it strategic radar, right? Strategic radars. So an effective and early warning system. Warning system means just when there is a red flag for a certain risk happen, acting as a strategic radar in all environments relevant to organization can detect discontinuities in trends previously perceived as stable and unchanging. So strategic radar, they have some major strategiዎች አሉ ከነዛ እንቅስቃሴ ውጭ የማይሆንባቸው right? That's not so. Our risk identification process should be aligned with our radar, strategic radar, main strategies, right? Main strategies. So there are some concepts related with these issues, but which are not important. I don't want to talk about it. So let's see this figure. Right, let's see this figure. This figure is related with some concept of weak signals, which is developed by Ansoff. Is an author, a strategic management author, who spent his life in studying risk analysis, in making risk analysis. So according, this is his expression about risk identification. See, this the y-axis is represented by room for action, right? Room for actions. This is a place we took actions. And the horizontal line or the x-axis is time, right? Time. So see this one, this curve. At early stage of the project, or at early stage of certain activities, we have a lot of opportunity to take action. See, the higher the action, the lower the time, right? The lower the time. But at early stage of the project, right? At early stage of the project, it is also difficult to identify indicator of risks. See, when the time go up, the number of indicator for the existence of risk is increased, right? Because through time, uncertainty declines or reduce, right? Reduce. So the concept of this thing is take action at early stage, right? Take action at early stage. But if we take time before taking action, we will be reactivist. We have to take reaction here. Reaction means the number of risk indicators are high and the alternative to take action are lower because we kill our time, right? We kill our time. Therefore, at this point, when after the interaction of the two lines, the number of indicators and action option for actions, after this point, we become reaction. Just we can only take reaction to minimize the risk, right? Minimize the risk. So in general, and of course, when time goes up, uncertainty decreases. This is what I'm saying before. And this is just rational for early warning. This is a figure which is rational for early warning. Take early action when you have a lot of options for actions. And if you take time, your action, the available option for action will be lower, and the number of indicators for a given risk will be higher, right? Will be higher. This is to indicate how important to investigate to identify risk at early stage, right? At early stage. Now the other one is what should be considered when identifying risk. So when you identify the risk, make sure you have all necessary informations. Information is a key to identify risk. Gather information from various sources. Accumulate all important informations, right? Accumulate all important informations. So the key for identifying risk is how to get information. Unfortunately, in today's world, obtaining or the way to obtain information is easy, right? And the way to obtain information is easy. What is bad is, sorry? So the challenge is how to accumulate relevant information and how to broaden the scope of available sources and how we can collect more creative information, right? Information. The problem today is the cost of information. We receive information from various sources, right? Various sources. But we are now at the period of paradox of plenty, which is an agreement that meaning plenty of information leads to poverty of attention, right? Poverty of attention. Therefore, the concept here is, in fact, we have different means to identify information, but still we have a challenge to obtain creative information. And the next step is, right? Lack of data is not a true problem today. Of course, it's a problem, but it's not a true problem today. The problem is related with we have plenty of information and we confuse to select which one is accurate and which one is relevant. Joseph Nee considers this paradox of plenty. You can read about this theory. right? You can search and read about this theory. Paradox of plenty of theory of paradox of plenty, right? So attention becomes the scarce resource. Information is not now scarce. Rather, what is scarce is attention. And those trying to spot the reality or really important issues are constantly challenged to distinguish between valuable signal and routine noise, right? Noise. So you should have information. What type of information? Relevant, right? Valuable. So the other thing we have to consider in identifying risk is you have to take you have to focus more on historical information and researches conducted at an industry or academic researches, right? Academic researches. Now it is time to discuss about risk identification tools and techniques, right? Techniques. Of course, I said you the most important techniques for risk identification is obtaining information. And the other one is how to and from where we get information is about tools, right? It's about tools. So we can have documentary review, or we can gather information using brainstorming or Delphi techniques, or we can have interview to obtain necessary information used to identify risk, right? Identify risk. Technique-wise, let's see some techniques, right? Let's see some techniques or methods that we have to use to identify risk. The first one is what we call root cause analysis. This is technique to identify risk. So here is more dedicated to determine the source of risk. Root cause, as the name indicates, root cause. Where is the root for the risk? This type of analysis focuses more on identifying the source of risk, not the type of risk. Not the type of risk. Rather, it's identifying source of risk. So, root cause analysis often conduct deep analysis of identifying risk in order to root out other potential risk. So, the source of risk may be seen superficial. Actually, when we talk about risk identification, it seems something easy task, but it's a very difficult one, right? It's very difficult to find the exact root cause of the risk, right? The risk of the risk. In this regard, HAL 1998 suggests 5 whys. 5 why it happened. At least ask 5 times why about a given risk. 5 why ምንለው አንድ ነገር ካለ በዛ ነገር ላይ አትሊስት 5 ጊዜ why የሚል ጥያቄዎች አንሱ ነው የዚህ ሰጀሽን because the root cause of a given risk is far from our understanding, complicated. It is not superficial, right? It's not superficial. So ask 5 why if you want to arrive the root cause of a given risk, right? This approach, we call it root cause analysis approach techniques. The second techniques, or we can say approach related with risk identification, is assumption analysis. It means we have to have some assumptions. The assumptions, remember, the assumption should be accurate, should be complete, and should be consistent, right? Should be consistent. So first, let's have assumption 1, assumption 2, assumption 3. All these assumptions should be complete, accurate, and consistent each other. Then we are going to test against 2 factors. We are going to test our assumptions against 2 factors. First factor is strength or validity of the assumption. The strength, we have to test the strength and value assumption. Second, we have to test the consequence to a given project. If the assumption turn out to be false, right? If you find your assumption A is false, assumption is false, a B is false, so you should go to reconsider or reclassifying a given risk, right? A given risk. So assumption analysis in short means we have a set of assumptions, complete, accurate, and constant assumptions, and these assumptions should be tested against a certain or two issues with regard to strength or validity and its consequence if the assumption is failed, right? Failed. If your assumption is failed, you should go to reclassify your risk. In order to identify risk, we must have classification in fact, right? In fact. The third techniques or tools is diagram techniques, right? Diagram techniques. There are three common, not all, there are three common diagram risk identification techniques. First one is cause and effect approach. Sometimes call it fishbone approach or Ishikawa diagram. The second one is system or process flowchart, and the last one is influence diagram. Let's see one by one. Let's see them one by one. The first one is what you call cause and effect or fishbone. Why we say fishbone? You can see here is the example. See, it seems fishbone, right? The arrow is to the right, right? Fishbone. ስናዘጋጀው ይሄ አሮ የአሳ አጥንት የሚመስል ነገር ስላለው fishbone approach, right? Fishbone. So under cause and effect or fishbone or Ishikawa diagram approach, we show the relationship between the effect of problem and their cause. Here is causal relationship, effect and cause, right? Effect and cause. First, we have to depict every potential cause of risk, right? And then we have to identify sub-causes, right? Sub-causes, and analyze their effect, right? Analyze their effect. This is the example of a fishbone diagram. It's not important as such, just I present here to show, right? I present this to show why we say fishbone diagram, right? Fishbone diagram. The other one is also cause and effect diagram, right? The other approach is also this one. You can say, ሁለት examples like the fishbone or cause and effect diagram, right? ሁለት examples like.
በትምህርት ከፍ ብሎ መብረር ይቻላል። ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ከከፍተኛ ትምህርት አግባብነትና ጥራት ኤጀንሲ ሙሉ ዕውቅናን ባገኘንባቸው በማስተርስ ዲግሪ ኤምቢኤ በስትራቴጂክ ማኔጅመንት፣ ኤምቢኤ በባንኪንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ ኤምቢኤ በቢዝነስ ሊደርሺፕ፣ ኤምቢኤ በሪስክና ኢንሹራንስ፣ ኤምኤስሲ በኢንተርናሽናል ትሬድ እና ኢኮኖሚክስ ዘርፎች በእውቀት ለመቅረጽ የበቁ ፕሮፌሰሮቻችን አረንጓዴ መብራታቸውን አብርተዋል። በነገራችን ላይ በኬንያ ሀገር ከሚገኙ ስመጥር ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች በሚመጡ ፕሮፌሰሮች የትኩረት መስክ ትምህርቶቹ መሰጠታቸው ልዩ ያደርገናል። በምርጥ የትምህርት ስርዓት የተገነባው ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ በመጀመሪያ ዲግሪ በአቪዬሽን ማኔጅመንት፣ በሆቴል ማኔጅመንት፣ በአካውንቲንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ በማርኬቲንግ ማኔጅመንት አስተማማኝ ትምህርት ይገቢውና ራስዎንና ሀገሮን ይለውጡ። አድራሻ 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
Second one is system or process flowchart. There is system, right? This is a kind of approach where systems or process are logically interlinked. Which systems or process? A process or a system to achieve a certain objectives, right? Certain objective. And in the flowchart diagram, we show what? Element of the process or system related to each other. And then your system, let's see this one. Can you see this one? ይታያል?
ይታያል።
በነገርኳችሁ ልክ ነው። ያልገባችሁ ነገር ካለ አስቁሙኝ። ኦኬ see this one, risk owner notify just this is an example taken from project management perspective. Risk owner notify project management event or risk trigger. ኦነሩ ኖቲፋይ አድርጓል ለማን? ለፕሮጀክት ማኔጀርስ ራይት። ሶ እዚህ ጋር አለ። ይሄ ምንድነው? ፕሪፓሬሽን ሲምቦል ነው አለ። we prepare for risk analysis. is risk owner notify project manager for events or risk triggers? ኖቲፋይ ተደርጓል ወይ ነው? when risk response plan executed next will say risk response plan ተፈጽሟል ነው። ኖ ከሆነ you see the answer is no. N means no and Y is yes. So we have to go. No means we have to prepare document results. That is termination symbol. We call it the termination symbols. If yes, we have to go to the next step or the next process. Response plan reviewed for effectiveness. መጀመሪያ response plan አለው ወይ ነው። ከዛ effectiveness አናይዝ ተደርጓል ነው። So if you say this is, we call it process symbol. ካለ ወደ ፕሮሰስ ልንሄድ ነው፣ ከሌለ ወደ ፕሮሰስ ልንሄድ ነው, right? So we have review risk scores and here is no and yes. Anyways, this is a diagram present to show how systems or process interlinked in order to identify a risk, right? Identify risk. So here review risk score, no. If no, we have to assign resource or implement response plan. If yes, we have to go to review risk and risk response plan, right? Just it is an example for project management process, right? Project management. For at your step, it is enough to know what system or process chart flow mean, right? Because this is should be executed for project management course. The third and the last one is influence diagram, right? The third or the last technique is to identify risk is prepare influence diagram. It is also designed to show the causal influence among variables. If it is project, we call it project variables. So here we have core point, quality, and there are factors or variables which affect quality. Scope, for instance. The larger the scope, might be difficult to achieve this quality or to accomplish in quality with high quality. Time, the shorter the time, might be hard to achieve qualities. Cost is the same, right? So actually these variables are from project management concept, right? From project management persons. Anyways, the sequence of the event will be analyzed using influence diagrams, right? And a virtual or visual relationship between the variables and the target issues. እዚህ ጋር ሪስካችን ምንድነው? ሪስክ ኦፍ አቺቪንግ ኳሊቲ ነው፣ right? ሪስክ ኦፍ አቺቪንግ ኳሊቲ ነው። ሶ እነዚህ አናይሱ መጠቀም we can address them, right? We can address them. So we finish risk identification process, and the next step in risk analysis is how to assess risk. Assessment is different from identifying risk. We will see where the difference is, right? Where the difference is. So technically, there is 3 important activity that has to be done in order to assess risk. 1, structuring the risk. 2, evaluating the risk. And 3, give priority, prioritization of the risk. Now, let's see how this activity are useful to assess a given risk, right? A given risk. And before we discuss one by one, right? Before we discuss one by one, you have to remember that it is not necessary to follow, to go from step 1 to step 2, or we don't need to follow the process. The important thing is considering the step, which means the steps do not necessarily follow each other. የግድ አንደኛውን ጨርሰን ወደ ሁለተኛው መሄድ አይጠበቅብንም። It's not necessary. But they are important part of risk assessments, right? Risk assessments. So let's see what does mean restructuring of the risk. So restructuring, at this phase, we aimed to order. Restruct at this activity or at this step, our aim is to order into potentially vast amount of identified risk. See here, in order to assess the risk, we should first identify risk, right? So structuring of risk means just give order or categorize different potential risk into subgroups, or it is a kind of clustering, right? It's a kind of clustering risk. For example, we will cluster risk as political risk, economic risk, societal, technological, ecological, or other types of categories. Therefore, structuring risk as a part of a risk assessment process means give order, categorize or cluster identified risk into subgroups. These groups are still major groups. Within political risk, there will be different types of risk, right? Economic risk will have some items. So structuring risk means it is all about dealing order of potential risk or define certain category of risks, right? Categories of risks. The other step in assessing risk is risk evaluation, right? Evaluation means it is identification or giving recognition on the relative significance of some risk compared to other. For example, here we have political risk, economic risk. So we have to compare their significance. Remember, the word significant in risk concept means significant based on our goal, based on stated objective. ሪስክ ሆኖ ጠቃሚ ቅድም ያለው ኦፖርቹኒቲ መፍጠር ነው። አብዛኛው ሪስክ አድቨርስ ኢንፍሉዌንስ ነው ያለው። ስለዚህ ምንድነው ሲግኒፊካንት ሚንስ ኢት ኢዝ ቤዝድ ኦን the objectives or because risk must be goal oriented. risk goal oriented መሆን አለበት። አናሊሲስ ስንሰራ goal oriented መሆን አለበት። then within goal we have objectives. We should have clear objectives, right? We should have clear objectives. So risk evaluation, the bad thing here is when we evaluate risk, even though we use objective approach, still it is seriously affected by subjective attitudes, subjective elements. Thus, or therefore, there is no clear-cut recognition of relative significance of risks. አንጻራዊ ነው እንጂ ክሊር የሆነ ነገር የለንም, right? Because in the evaluation there are a set of subjective items which is difficult to value, right? Difficult to value. The last item in assessing risk is prioritizing, give priority. Why we give priority? Because we have to tackle the risk. Otherwise, we will be great losers, right? We will be great losers. So risk prioritization means it is all about which risk should be tackled first, which follow next or later. Because there are unlimited number of potential risks. And we have also limited amount of resource. So there should be, we have to trade off between the benefit and the cost, and so that we can give priorities. So the reason we give priority is because there are various potential risks, but we could able to handle only limited risks due to resource, right? Due to resource constraints. So the order or prioritization should be based on a cost of particular risk. The higher cost of risk should have to give the higher priorities, right? Priorities. Well, this is about all about assessing risk, and we are now going to the last process in risk analysis, which is mitigating risk, mitigating the risk. Now at this level, we already identified the risk, we structured them, we give value, and we already
Yes, I have a question about this prioritization.
If
the only means is cost to prioritize risks, because it depends upon the risk manager. Some risk manager give priority for the other risk. The other, it is personal judgment for me, not only cost. So is it the only way to prioritize risk is a cost?
That is very important and good questions. And actually, what is the most difficult thing in risk is both cost and benefit, especially benefit is difficult to measure, right? አንጻራዊ ኮስት አንጻራዊ ፊዚብል የሆነ ሜጀርመንት ስለሆነ ሌሎቹ ከኮስት ውጭ ሆነ there are other items which are essential but very difficult to measure and value. In fact, for managers, especially those managers who lead a big and complicated business, cost may not be the only criteria to prioritize risk, may not be, but we can genuinely say that cost is the most important item we have to consider in giving priority, right? In giving priority. For example, cost የምንለው ያው በዚህኛው ኮንሰፕት cost of a given risk ማለት consequence ነው። ለምሳሌ environmental cost ሊኖር ይችላል፣ right? ወይም ደግሞ ሌሎች ኮስቶች ሊኖሩ ይችላሉ። ብቸኛው አይደለም እንዳልሽው ብቸኛው አይደለም። ነገር ግን for providing risk prioritization cost ነው። ኮስት ስንለው ይሄ አካውንቲንግ ኮስት ብቻ አይደለም። It's not about accounting cost. Cost in this case is the adverse effect of a risk ነው። ሪስኩ የሚያስከትለው adverse effect ነው። We are not talking about accounting cost. ሰብሎን የተረዳሽኝ? ኮስት የምንለው ወርድ እዚህ ጋር የምንጠቀመው አካውንቲንግ ኮስት ብቻ አይደለም። ሜጀረብል የሚደረገው ነው። ሌሎች ኮስቶች ኮስት በዚህ ሰንስ the adverse effect of a given risk ነው፣ right? a given risk። ስለዚህ ቀደም ሜጀር እንደነገርሽኝ ነን ሜጀረብል አይተሞች አሉ። ከአካውንቲንግ ኮስቶች ስመጣ ኢኮኖሚክ ኮስቶች አሉ፣ ነን ሜጀረብልስ፣ right? ነን ሜጀረብል ኮስቶች አሉ። ስለዚህ ሪሌቲቭ አድቫንቴጅን ነው የሚያዩት እና ቀደም እንዳልኩሽ ብቸኛው አይደለም፣ ነገር ግን the most important ነው።
ምንድነው ሳይንቲፊክ ነገር አይደለም ይሄ ሞር ምክንያቱም ፕራዮሪታይዝ ለመስጠት ሳይንቲፊክ ካልኩሌሽን ስለሌለው ለአንዱ ማኔጀር ፕራዮሪቲ የሚሰጠው ለሌላው ላይ ሰጠው ይችላልና ፐርሰናል ጀጅመንት ይሆናል ሞር ብዬ ነው ማስበው። ለዛ ነው የጠየቁት።
ትክክል ነው። ለምሳሌ ከምን ቲዮሪ ያለ መሰለሽ እንደምታውቁት ኤጀንሲ ቲዮሪ አለ አይደል? ኤጀንሲ ቲዮሪ ለምሳሌ ኤጀንሲ ቲዮሪ ምን ያመጣል? ኮንፍሊክት ኦፍ ኢንተረስት ያመጣል። አንዳንድ ማናጀሮች ምን መውሰድ ይሰዳሉ? they want to take the higher risk because it have higher return, right? ማናጀሮች ምንድነው? managers often they want to take the risk, the higher the risk because it have ይሄ ምንለው ፐርሰንት ነው። ኤጀንሲ ቲዮሪ ላይ ኮንፍሊክት ኦፍ ኢንተረስቶች ይኖራሉ። አንዱ ማናጀር ለምሳሌ ሃይ ኮስት ኢን ተርምስ ኦፍ ሪስክ ሃይ ኮስት ያለውን ይመርጥ ይችላል። ምክንያቱም ሃየር ሪስክ ሃየር ሪተርን ስላለው ማለት ነው። አንዳንድ ማናጀር ደግሞ they fear. They will go to the low cost, the low risk, and they will choose what? The low return, right? The low return. እንደዚህ አይነት ደሊማዎች አሉ። አክቹዋሊ እንዳልሽው ሰብጀክቲቭ ነው፣ ደሊማዎች አሉ። እዚህ ግን ምንድነው ጀነራል ኮንቴክስት ስናስበው በየትኛውም ፕሮጀክት ማኔጅመንት ኮንሰፕት ወይም ፕሮጀክት አናሊሲስ ስናስበው ኮስት ኢዝ ኢምፖርታንት ነው but not the only. በዛ ያጅል right? An important but not the only considerations.
Okay.
We are almost to finish. We are on the last step on identifying risk analysis process. This is mitigating the risk. Now we already identify the risk, we assess or evaluate the risk, and what's left is to decide a decision. The first two steps or the first two processes in the risk analysis are elements of this step. Mitigating means it is how to treat or how to manage or how to deal with the risk. አሁን ለይተናል፣ አይደንቲፋይ አድርገናል፣ ሪሌቲቭ ዋጋ ሰጥተናል። what is left is how to mitigate the adverse effect of risk. So theoretically there are two fundamental mitigation strategies. One is taking preventive measures, and the other one is taking precautionary measures. Preventive measures means it is related, is more intended to prevent occurrence of an adverse effect. ለዚህ ሚቲጌት የምናደርገው ምንድነው? adverse effect occur ከማድረጉ prevent the occurrence እንዳይከሰት ማድረግ ነው mitigation mechanism. And we focus on removing the cause of a risk. Please remember, preventive measure of risk mitigation strategy is it deals about prevent the risk not to occur or deal with the cause of a risk, right? Deal with the risk of the risk. While precautionary measure or strategies is as intended or aimed to alleviate the damage. Now here, the risk is already occurred. Why?
እዚህ አካባቢ አንድ ጥያቄ አለ። ምክንያቱም ሪስኩ አድቨርስ ኢፌክት ነው ካለው how it is deviate from our expectation ነው እና that expectation is maybe opportunity or threat ነው ነው ከሁለቱ ነው። አሁን ፕሪቬንቲቭ ላይ ሲንገባ we need opportunity ከሆነ opportunityን ደግሞ ለመጨመር happen እንዲያደርግ ነው የምናበረታታው። ይሄኛውን ፕሪቬንት ነው የምናደርገውና እንቀንሰዋለን። ያኛውን ደግሞ happen እንዲያደርግ እናበረታታለን። ይሄኛው ግን ኮንሰፕት ይመስለኛል እኔ ለዚህ ለኔጌቲቭ ሳይዱ እንጂ ለፖዚቲቭ ሳይዱ እንዲሰራ ከሆነ ደግሞ ያንን አይቀርንም ነው ይሄንን ይቀርናል። ይሄን ብቻ አይሆንም ብዬ
I understand. ደሪባ ኮንሰፕቱ እንደዚህ ነው። ኮንሰፕቱ ምንድነው? ሪስክ ኦፖርቹኒቲ ያለው ማለት ምንድነው? ኢንድለስ ነው። ኦፖርቹኒቲው ደግሞ ምን አለው? ያ ኦፖርቹኒቲ ሌላ እንትንም ሪስክም አለው። ኮንቲኒየስ ነው። አንዱ ካንዱ ይሄ እንደ ሰርክል ነገር የለም፣ ላይፍ ሳይክል ነገር።
ኦኬ
ኦፖርቹኒቲ ቢኖረውም ያ ኦፖርቹኒቲ ሪስክ አለው። ራይት? ቅድም ያለው ኦፖርቹኒቲ አሁን ፍሮም ቤስት ኦፖርቹኒቲ ነው የምንወስደው አይደል? ኦፖርቹኒቲ ነው። ነገር ግን ሁሉም ኦፖርቹኒቲዎች they have also related risk, right? Related risk. እንዳልከው ግን preventive measures እኛ ሪስክን ፊት ለፊት እያየን ኦፖርቹኒቲውን አንጠብቅም። ራይት? መጀመሪያ ግን በኮንሰፕት ደረጃ ሪስክን አንደርስታንድ ስናደርገው ሁሌ አድቨርስ ኢፌክት ነው የሚል ነገር አይደለም። አንዳንድ ሪስኮች ኦፖርቹኒቲ ይዘው ይመጣሉ። ያ ኦፖርቹኒቲ ደግሞ በራሱ ሌላ ሪስኮችን ይዘው ይመጣል ነው። ስለዚህ ሰርቴን ሪስክ ኦፖርቹኒቲ ስላለው ይዘው ኒድ የሚል ነገር አይደለም። እንትኑ ኬዙ አክቹአሊ እንዳልከው ኢፍ አንድ ሪስክ ሃፕን ካደረገ በኋላ ፈልገን የምንገባው ሪስክ በጣም ትንሽ ነው። ራይት? ፈልገን የምንገባቸው ሪስኮች ኦፖርቹኒቲ ስላላቸው የምንገባባቸው ሪስኮች አይደንቲፋይ ካደረግነው በጣም ትንሽ ናቸው። ስለዚህ ፕሪቨንቲቭ ሜካኒዝምስ do you think that አንድ ነገር ደሪባል ጠይቅ ምናልባት ጥያቄን አንደርስታንድ አደርጋለሁ ነገር ግን አንድን ሪስክ አናላይዝ አድርገን ሪስክ ሞ አይደንቲፋይ ካደረግን በኋላ ይሄንን ነገር ይፈጥርናል ብለን እናስኬደዋለን from deal with from finance in project management concept ይሄንን እንትን አጠቃላይ ኮንሴፕቹላይዝ ያደረጉት ስታዲውን በፋይናንስ እና በኮንሴፕት ማኔጅመንት በፕሮጀክት ማኔጅመንት ኮንሰፕት ነው
ምክንያቱም ሪስክ ስንለው ከመጀመሪያው ነው it is some አጋጣሚ ነገሮች አሉት አጋጣሚ ነገሮች ደግሞ ሪስክ ቢመስሉም ለኛ ኦፖርቹኒቲ የሚያመጡ ከሆኑ እነሱን ኢንሃንስ አድርገን ጨምረንባቸው የምንሄድባቸው ጊዜያቶች አሉ ግን ሀፒን ካረጉ ማለት ነው ካላረጉማ ቅድም እንደተባለው ፍራት ምክንያቱም የሪስክ ቶለራንሳችን ልዩነት ስላለው በዛው መጠን እኛ እንዲከላከለዋለን ምክንያቱም ቶለሬት ጥቅምም ቢያመጣልን ይሄን ነገር አንገባበትም ብለን የምንፈራበት ምክንያቱም ጥቅሙን ብቻ አይተን ከገባንበት ደግሞ ዘሪቨርስም ሌላ ጉዳት ስላለው እሱንም እናስባለን ግን አንዳንዶቹ በአጋጣሚ የመጡትን ኤክስፕሎት ለማድረግ እሱን እኔን ሳናረግም ወይ ነው አባባሌ
of course I understand and actually we are here at says second participant who is ማን ያወጣው ሌላ እጁ ሌላ አለ ሌላ ሰው
መሳይ ነኝ
መሳይ እሺ መሳይ
አቶ ድሪባ ባነሳው ላይ ምናልባት የኔ ሀሳብ ትክክል መሆኑን እንድታረምልኝ ነው ምናልባት ይሄንን አይደንቲፋይ ካደረግን ፕሮሰሱን በዲያግራሚንግ ቴክኒክ ስንሄድ ቅድም በየስ ኦር ኖ ፕሮሰስ እዛ የራሱ ስቴፕ ይዞ የሚሄድ ይመስለኛል የስ ሲሆን ሌላ ነው
of course sure በዛ ነው ኮንሰፕቹዋሊ የሚሄደው ይሄ እንደዛ ነው ፕሪቬንቲቭ ሜጀርስ የምንለው እኛ ፕሪቨንት የምናደርገው እንደተባለው አክቹአሊ እዚህ ጋር አንድ ነገር መንታለ ፕሪቬንቲቭ ሜጀር እና ፕሪኮሽነሪ ሜጀር እንትን አይደለም ሰፕሊሜንታሪ አይደሉም ፕሪቨንት ካደረግነው ፕሪቨንት ለምሳሌ ይሄ ሪስክ ይጠቅመናል ብለን በኋላ ወስደን ዳሜጅ እናስተካክለን ማለት አንችልም ኮምፕሊሜንታሪ ስለሆኑ ማለት ነው anyways two questions ሁለታችሁም ያነሳችሁ ኬዝ I will agree but at this level we identify the risk we evaluate the risk we give priority right we give priority ስለዚህ priority ከሰጠነው በኋላ ምንድነው which risk should be tackled first which risk tackled second like that we are in the consequence ስለዚህ mitigation mechanism preventing measures እናደርገው of course we have to prevent bad risk with bad consequence right with bad consequence and the word bad is a kind of relatives right it's a kind of relatives but so far our preventive mechanisms or our mitigation mechanisms should be based on the order of the prioritize right prioritize we give less attention for those who have less cost and high opportunities right and high opportunities therefore we present the occurrence of an event and therefore we take removing the cause of their particular risk የምናደርገው for those risk who have priority ቀደም እንዳልሁት 50 ሪስኮች ካሉ 50ውንም ፕሪቨንት እናደርገው አንችልም right we should give priorities take some of them the others may have as you said may have opportunities low prioritization means they have small effect and they will have opportunities right opportunities ተግባብተናል ወይስ አልተግባባንም hello
ተግባብተናል
okay አቶ ደሪባ ተግባብተናል አይደል your idea is guiding now I just focus on the most prioritized or risk with big consequence and less opportunities we have to prevent them, right? So precautionary measures, this is the opposite of the first one, or the prevention measures. Here we deal about how to alleviate the damage once the risk is occurred. And here our aim is to reduce. It is bad consequence, right? It's bad consequence. Generally, the two strategies, they are not substitutes. They are complementary, which means it is dangerous to neglect prevention in the favor of precaution, right? Or vice versa. From practical or operational management perspective, it is almost impossible to eliminate a particular risk completely. Operational perspective or practical perspective. Or in other words, we will not have a total control on a given risk. Right? A total control on a given risk. And it is not practically or logical to eliminate the risk, a given risk. It is not practical to eliminate or completely eliminate a given risk. Even if it is possible, it is not logical because some risk has an opportunity. Right? We should not pay attention for risk with low cost, but better opportunities. Right? So, now let us go to how we can deal with risk with opportunity, ወይም ደግሞ ቀደም እንዳልነው ኦፖርቹኒቲ ያላቸው ሪስኮች ጋር በምን አይነት መንገድ ዲል እናድርግ ነው። or in order to bring risk in line with opportunity ወይም ደግሞ አንድን ሪስክ ወደ ኦፖርቹኒቲ ኮንቨርት ለማድረግ what we have to follow. There are 3 logical steps suggested. Actually, it's logical and ideal, right? An ideal and logical. The first one is we can avoid or eliminate risk. As I said before, ሁሉንም ሪስኮች ቤት ማድረግ አይቻልም. There are some risks that can be eliminated. For example, here in nanotechnologies, in some technologies, we can stop or ban the risk. However, stop or ban one risk may lead to another risk. For instance, an example የተወሰደው ምንድነው? አንድ ቴክኖሎጂ effectun እንትን እናያለን. For example, here there is some issue related with nanotechnology. The avoidance of this risk, nanotechnology risk, may have other risks, such as deceleration of economic development or reliance on environmentally more problematic technologies, because they may have polluting or outdated technologies, right? The other one is risk can be reduced. In fact, this is the core principle of risk mitigation and risk management. Mitigation የሚለው concept በደንብ የሚሰራው when we try to reduce risk, right? Or reduction of risk is a core idea in risk management process and risk analysis, right? So here at this point, there are risks. We can reduce their effect using either of the 2 strategies, preventive or precautionary measures, right? Preventive measures. And the last one is some risk can be transferred to the other, which is more related with your measure. For example, having insurance coverage may be a means to transfer. Though there are a lot of risks that cannot be transferred. ይሄ ላይሰራ ይችላል። ኢንሹራንስ የማይሰራበት ኮንዲሽኖች ይኖራሉ፣ ትራንስፈር ማድረግ የማንችልባቸው አይተሞች። To conclude our discussions, this is the steps option for risk mitigation. See this graph. Total risk is what? Here. if we can eliminate, of course, we cannot totally eliminate. Most risks cannot be eliminated. There are only few risks that can be eliminated. Here is total risk. And the next one is we reduce the risk. It was full, this is full black shaded. And when you reduce the risk, a certain white part of the figure is here. And the last one is we have to transfer. ሶስቱንም ስቴፕ ሂደን ግን የምናደርገው ስቴፕ አለ። there is a residual risk. With that we have to bear ማድረግ መውሰድ ያለብን ሪስክ ይኖራል። ከነዚህ ከሊሚት ሬዲዩስ ትራንስፈር ከዛ የተረፈ ሪስክ ምን አለ? there is a risk we have to bear. And this risk have an opportunity. Seize this opportunity. And so opportunity have also some risk. And here balancing the bear to take a given risk and to take the opportunity, we call it management, risk management. Here we need to manage, right? እዚህ ጋር ሌላ management process ይፈልጋል. There is a risk we have to bear, and this risk has an opportunity, and this opportunity may have some risk. And then here, risk management process, it starts to work, right? Starts to work. So this is all about today's lesson, right? It's all about today's lesson. Shall I share you now the materials, or it should be after I finish the chapter? ምን እናድርግ? ይሄን ሼር አድርጋችሁ ወይስ ቻፕተሩ ካለቀ በኋላ? ጠፋችሁ?
አንተ በተመቸ
ቻፕተሩ አጠናቅቄ አስጨርስ ላክላችሁ ከመጽሐፉ ጋር ምናምን መሳይ ኢሜል ፈርስት ቻፕተር መሳይ ኢሜልን ላክልኝ በኢሜል ላክልክ።
መልካም ቀላል ነው። ምናልባት መጽሐፍ ከተቻለ ከቻልክ
መጽሐፍም አለኝ ይሄ ማቴሪያልም አለ ሁለቱም ታች
መጽሐፍ ከቻልክ አሁን መሳይ ተድላ
ኦኬ ስልኬ የለህም እንዴ?
አዎ አልሰጠኝም።
እሺ ይቅርታ በጣም
እንደዛ ኮኔ ቴክስት አድርገህ
ወይ ልደውልልህና አደረኛለህ በኋላ። መልካም እሺ። ጥያቄዎች አላችሁ ወይ
አለን እዚህ መጨረሻው ላይ
እሺ
ኤሊሚኔሽኑ ላይ ፕራክቲካል ፖይንት ኦፍ ቪው ሁለት ሪስኮችን ነው ኤሊሚኔት የምናደርገው። ሁለት ሪስኮች ማለት አንደኛው ሪስክ ማናጀሩ ኤሊሚኔት የሚያደርገው ሪስኩ ኢንሲግኒፊካንት ነው ቢመጣም ችግር አያመጣም ዩካን ልንቋቋመው እንችላለን ብሎ በቃ ስለሱም ምንም ነገር አያመጣም። ሪሲጁዋል ሪስክ ላይ ከሆነ ኮንቲንጀንሲ ፕላን ይፈልጋል ናቹራሊ።
ኤሊሚኔት ሪስክ የሚለውን ይቅርታ ደሪቫ እንዳላሳንት እንዳንተን ሚስኮንሰፕት እና ኤሊሚኔት ማድረግ ማለት the cost of the risk ሙሉ ለሙሉ አቮይድ ማድረግ ማለት ነው።
እሱን እኮ ነው። ምክንያቱም ኮስት ምንም ብዙ ነገር አያመጣም ችግር አያመጣም ብሎ በጣም ትንሽ ስትሆን የትም ማድረግ ስለማይፈልግ ይተዋታል።
እሷን ቢር ነው የሚያደርጋት ይወስዳል ማለት ነው። ያ ማለት ይተዋታል ማለት በማኔጅመንት ኮንሰፕት ምንድነው? ይሄን ሪስክ መተው ማለት we take the consequence of the risk ማለት አይደለም።
ሌላው ደግሞ አማራጭ የሌለው ሪስክ ነው። ምክንያቱም እነዚህ ውስጥ መክተት ስለማይችል ሪዲዩስ ማድረግ የማይችል ከሆነ ትራንስፈር ማድረግ የማይችል ከሆነ ይሄ ሪስክ ከእንትኑ ውጪ ስለሚሆን በቃ ባመጣው ይምጣ ብሎ ይሄ ምን አይነት ሪስክ ነው ፋንዳሜንታል ሪስክ አይነት ነገር ከሆነ ይተዋዋል። የግድ ኤሊሚኔት ነው ያንን አይነት ነው
ኤሊሚኔት የሚለውን እንትን አትለው ነው። ኤሊሚኔት ማለት መተው ማለት አይደለም። ኤሊሚኔት ማለት ያን ሪስክ ሰክሰስፉሊ ዲስትሮይ ማድረግ ነው። ኮንሲኩዌንሱን ዲስትሮይ ማድረግ ነው።
አቮይድ ማድረግ መሰለኝ ሪስክ
አቮይዳንስ ማለት ነው። እሱ አቮይድ ማለት ጋር ተቀምጧል። በዛኛው ኮንሰፕት እንተረዳ ነው የተሳተ ስለመሰለኝ ነው እንትን ያው እዚህ ጋር ምንድነው የሚለው አቮይድ ኦር ኤሊሚኔት ማለት የሚለው ይሄ ማለት የምንችል ከሆነ ኢፌክቱ ሙሉ ለሙሉ አቮይድ ማድረግ ነው። ይሄ ኢፌክቱን አቮይድ ማድረግ ማንችል ከሆነ እንቀንሳለን ኢፌክቱ። ለዛ የምንቀንስበት አንደኛው ሜትድ ደግሞ ምንድነው? ትራንስፈር ማድረግ ነው። ከዚህ በኋላ ከሆነ በኋላ ግን we have to take it, all right? We have to take the risk, the cost of the risk. That means bearing the risk, right? bear የምናደርገው ሪስክ ምንድነው? it might have opportunity. ካለው opportunity is okay, right? opportunity ካለው is okay. ግን opportunity ቅድም ባይሆን ምንድነው? any opportunity has risk.
ግን እኔም አሁን አንድ ነገር እዚህ ጋር እንትኑ ስላልመጣልኝ ለምሳሌ እኔ መኪና የሚነዳ ከሆነ አደጋ ደርሳለሁ ካልኩ መኪና መንዳቱን ከታውኩት avoid that risk አይደለም እንዴ? አላዳም ካልኩ avoid አደረኩ ማለት ነው። ግን
ሌላ ስቴፕ አይሄድም። ሌላ ስቴፕ እዚህ ስቴፕ ላይ ቆማል።
ግን አሁን ምክንያቱም ምንም ሜጀር አክሽን የማይወስዱበት ትላልቅ ሪስኮች ይኖራሉ። ለድርጅት ሊሆን ይችላል ወይ ለኢንዲቪጁዋል ይሆናል። ምንም አክሽን ትራንስፈር ማድረግ አይችሉም፣ ሪዲዩስ ማድረግ አይችሉም፣ ከመጣ ምንም ማድረግ አይችሉም። እና እሱ ምንድነው አቮይዳንስ ነው የሚባለው።
ይሄው እዚህ ጋር
ለሱኛው
that is the risk we have to bear ነው። ይሄው ከአቅማችን በላይ ሆኖ ሊሆን ይችላል ወይም ደግሞ በፈቃደኝነት የምንወስደው ምንድነው the risk we bear ነው የምንለው።
ቢር የምናደርገው ሪሲጁዋል ሪስኩን ነው። ያ ማለት እኮ ኮንቲንጀንሲ ፕላን አለን ማለት ነው። ለዚህ ነገር ቢመጣም ቀላለች እንሸፍራለን ብለን ፕላን አዘጋጅተናል ኦልሬዲ። ፎል ባክ ፕላን ይኖረናል ወይ ኮንቲንጀንሲ ፕላን አለን እዚህ ላይ እና ግን አቮይድ የምናደርገው ሪስክ ትልቁንም በጣም ትልቁ ሪስክ በቃ ኤርዝኩዌክ ቢሆን ምንም ማድረግ የማንችለው ከሆነ በቃ እንቀበለዋለን። ሲመጣ ያጠፋል ብለን ነው ምንተው ነው እንዴት ነው የሚለው ነገር ነው። እሱ ኮንሰፕት ነው።
ይሄኛው ኮንሰፕቱ ኖርማሊ ብለዋል፣ በትክክል ብለዋል። ማለት ሪስክን አቮይድ የምናደርግበት ሜትድ ምንድነው? ሜቶዶሎጂካሊ አቮይድ የምናደርግበት ሁለት ነው። አንደኛው we have to restrict ourselves from the action፣ ያንን ነገር ከማድረግ መቆጠብ ነው አይደል? ለስት ኤግዛምፕል ነው። ሌላው ደግሞ ሪስክን ኤሊሚኔት የምናደርገው ምንድነው? by taking its relative benefit ነው። ያን we implement it but still we have what? we have relative advantage, right? relative advantage ከዛ ፐርስፔክቲቭ ነው። ካልከው ጋር አንድ አይነት ነው። አንተ ካልከው ጋር የት የለውም።
እሺ
ሌላ ጥያቄ አለ? መልካም አዳር።
ልዩነት መፍጠር ዓላማችን ነው። ዓለም አቀፍ ተወዳዳሪ መሆን አለባችሁ። የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ጥራትና ደረጃውን የጠበቀ ስልጠና በመስጠት ብቁ ዜጋ እያፈራን ነው። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን፣ በበረራ መስተንግዶ፣ በቲኬቲንግና ሪዘርቬሽን፣ በሆቴልና ቱሪዝም ሙያዎች አሰልጥነን ተወዳዳሪ እናደርጉታለን። ኮሌጃችን ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ICM ጋር በመተባበር ዓለም አቀፍ ዕውቅና ያለው ስልጠና እየሰጠ ይገኛል። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን፣ በበረራ መስተንግዶ የምንሰጣቸው ስልጠና ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና አለው። አድራሻ ከጎላጉል ታወር 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ህልሞን